Calvin headed home. He hated leaving in the middle of the day, but he was sick as a dog. It was cold and drizzling, the cool, adverse weather matching his foul mood. He knew he had a temperature. His head was woozy and he was so nauseous he had to force himself not to throw up. He desperately hoped he'd make it home before he did. Getting home didn't take long. But with his head pounding, his body racked with chills and his stomach boiling, it somehow seemed longer. He made the last turn and headed toward the back of the house. He unlocked the back door and staggered into the kitchen as he usually did. He heard rap music playing in the living room. That was odd. He didn't know they owned any rap music. Over the music, he immediately heard her cries of distress. "Oh God. Oh shit. Oh God." She cried. Calvin heard her cries. But it was the slapping sound of flesh on flesh that stopped him cold. His ears picked up the distinct sound of her moaning as a loud male voice bellowed out. "That's it. Oh yeah. Nice and deep, just the way you like it, right?" She responded with a series of gasps and moans. "Damn, you're tight." The unknown man observed with amusement. "Doesn't that puny wimp you married ever screw you?" She moaned out loud as he bragged. "All you married women love my big tool. Take it and love it. You know you do." His sickness was instantly forgotten. Calvin carefully crept across the kitchen toward the doorway to the living room. He was wearing sneakers, so his footsteps were silent on the linoleum floor. He probably wouldn't have been heard anyway over the loud rap music. He tentatively peeked around the corner, and what he saw nearly made him throw up. She was naked, bent over the back of the sofa, with a naked, heavily muscled man behind her. The guy had his cap on backwards like he was a badass. Calvin thought he looked college age, much younger than her. He was well over 6 foot and clearly in shape, maybe an athlete of some sort, thick and muscular. The man stopped thrusting and attempted to reposition his erection. After a moment, she begged, "No. I told you I don't want it there. Not there, damn you. I already told you, Not there, please." "Shut up." He laughed, holding her tight. He added with an evil chuckle, "Nothing's gonna stop me now." "Stop, please." "Oh. That's too damn bad," he yelled, slapping her so hard it left another pink handprint on her fleshy bottom. "Shut up. It's going in, no matter what. So, get ready for it. You're gonna take it, one way or the other." Calvin had seen enough. He was scared, but he had to stop him. The man was brutalizing her, and he loved her like no other. At all costs, he had to protect her from this slimy animal. This was nothing more than a brutal assault. A primal sense of rage set into his mind as he quickly decided what to do. The guy was clearly bigger than him. Much bigger. In a physical confrontation, Calvin knew he had no chance. If he just barged in and shoved the guy off her, there was no telling how it would turn out. She would help him. He knew that. But if the guy was ruthless enough to sodomize her against her will, he could probably put both of them in a hospital or worse. Calvin crouched down. Using the recliner by the door to hide his movements, he crawled past the doorway into the hall. In the hall closet was the rifle he got as a Christmas gift a year ago. It was set high in the closet for safety, so that children wouldn't be able to find it. They always had guns in the house. It was their tradition, but all firearms except this rifle were in the gun safe in the basement. The household rules about firearm safety had been drilled into him. Only this weapon was not in the safe, temporarily lodged in the closet because he had just cleaned it after rabbit hunting this past weekend. He hadn't yet put it back in the gun safe, and was glad now that he hadn't. He took the key from its hiding place and unlocked the safety lock that he always kept on the trigger guard. With trembling hands, he opened the box of ammo on the shelf and loaded the weapon. It was only a .22 caliber rifle, but he was using a .22 long rifle cartridge, which was a much hotter round than a regular .22 bullet. It would certainly do the job if he could keep his wits and not miss. That was unlikely since the asshole was just a few feet away and he was a crack shot. But he had never confronted anyone before with a weapon. He could only hope that in the heat of passion he would keep his sanity and shoot straight. He crept back to the doorway and peeked in. His heart was pounding and sweat was pouring off his head. The guy must have stopped fucking her ass, giving her a brief respite from the pain. Over the music, he heard her sobbing. He was hurting her. The guy was staring down at her pink ass, holding the plump cheeks apart with his thumbs. She was still bent over the sofa, moaning for him to stop. He couldn't believe this guy could be so cruel. She was literally begging him to stop, and he just laughed. Rage so intense he couldn't control himself suddenly washed over him. With determined resolve, Calvin stepped around the corner and made his presence known. She was still bent over the sofa, staring down at the cushion. Her long dark hair curtained around her face, so she never saw Calvin in the doorway with fear on his face and a loaded rifle in his hands. The guy must notice the movement because he glanced over at Calvin with surprise. An angry expression transformed his features into a fierce, hateful glare. "What the hell?" The man blurted out. "Get off her," Calvin said in a tremulous voice. The woman definitely heard him now. She lifted her head a little when she recognized his voice. Calvin tried to sound intimidating, but the guy must not have thought so. He faced him and sneered, "You little shit. Get out of here." "I said get off her," Calvin ordered, pointing the gun at him. "Now." The big man flashed a gloating look which surprised Calvin. Did he not take the gun seriously? Instead of complying, the naked man charged toward him, with surprising speed for such a big man. "I'm gonna kill you," he started to say when the first shot rang out. Bang! The .22 cartridge isn't a very loud round, but in the enclosed area of the living room, it sounded like an explosion. The smell of gunpowder filled the room. She screamed, but the guy just looked stunned. The shot hit him in the side of his chest, and a small red hole suddenly appeared next to his nipple. Blood began dripping from the hole, running down his abdomen. "Get off her, you animal!" Calvin yelled, angrier than he'd ever been in his life. He kept the rifle pointed at him and waved it, gesturing for him to get away from her. Instead, the big guy started toward him again, this time with hands balled into fists and his eyes blazing with hate. "I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker!" The man screamed, rushing toward him. Bang! Bang! Another 2 shots rang out. One missed, but the second hit the big man square in the chest, the round tumbling around in his chest cavity before piercing his heart. As the guy rushed forward, his face went white with shock. He stumbled as he ran, as if tripping over his own feet, and fell face first onto the carpet. She bolted up from the sofa and cried, "Oh no." For a moment she looked confused. Then her face went frantic as she let out a wail. She pulled her blouse down to cover her nakedness and fell down next to the young, bleeding man on the floor. "Oh my God, Calvin, what have you done?" She sobbed, trying to turn the dead man over and using her hand to stop the bleeding. "I stopped him, Ma," Calvin said, trembling with adrenaline. He stopped speaking when he noticed his mother looking shocked and confused as she glanced around with watery eyes wide and her mouth open in bewilderment. "Oh no. My God, no. Calvin, honey." She choked painfully, trying to make sense of what just happened. "I stopped him," Calvin repeated without remorse. "He was assaulting you. I saw him do it, and I had to stop him." "Oh my God. Hurry, honey, call an ambulance. Quick," was all she could say without breaking down. The police and ambulance were there in minutes. Calvin told the dispatcher what he saw and how he shot the guy screwing his mother. The woman calmly told him to leave the gun in the house and go outside and wait for the police. They arrived with sirens wailing and guns drawn. They made the boy lie on the ground as they searched him. While they sorted out the situation, Calvin was put in handcuffs and placed in back of a squad car. 2 hours later, his father was at the police station. Tom was contacted at work and only heard that his son shot a man in their home, with very few details. Under police escort, Gina was sent to the hospital in a state of shock. Tom knew she would be taken care of, so he decided he needed to see his son first. In the cell, he was sitting on a bench next to Calvin, who was quite upset about what happened. He told his father what he saw in the living room and what he did about it. He was assaulting her dad. The 16-year-old pleaded, "I saw him. He had Mom bent over the sofa and was assaulting her. I had to do something." "I know, Cal. Don't worry about it," Tom said consolingly. He patted his son on the shoulder. "He was a creep, all right. I have to get you out of here. You were only protecting your mother, and no one can blame you for that." "But they said I was being charged with murder." Calvin sniffled. He wiped a tear away. "One of the cops said it was an ambush. They said I had the gun and should have just told him to leave her alone. I did, but he didn't leave. He came after me." "I know. We'll get a lawyer, Cal. I have to find one and get bail for you." Calvin went on in a pleading tone as if he wasn't listening. "He was a big guy, Dad. He hurt Mom. Bad. I heard her telling him to stop and he wouldn't. He was even laughing about it as he hurt her. She was crying. I had my rifle and I couldn't think of anything else to do." It was the next morning before he could get his son released on bail. Tom found the district attorney to be a whiny, headline-chasing little shit. Despite the boy's clear misunderstanding, he gave Calvin no credit for his age or for not realizing what was actually happening. Tom's lawyer protested bitterly, but the DA wanted to charge him with murder and keep Calvin locked up until the grand jury could decide if there was enough evidence for a murder trial. The DA certainly thought so by the disparaging manner he described the boy. Their lawyer informed Tom that this DA was an asshole, a publicity hound trying to make a name for himself with the gun control crowd. There were a few cases recently of breaking and entering, in which the homeowner shot the suspected burglar. He was anxious to convict one such homeowner to make an example that you shouldn't use deadly force as a first response to break-ins. But while the powers that be were on the DA's side, they decided this case wasn't a clear case of intentional murder. The age of the suspect, as well as the fact that the boy clearly felt the man was raping his mother, wouldn't make good headlines for the county's judicial system. Even before the decision was made, Tom's lawyer surreptitiously let the details of the case slip to local news outlets. Once the news folks got public opinion involved, bitter outrage in the form of letters, texts, and emails were sent to the courthouse, all supporting Calvin. They had a private conference and decided to drop the charges and let him go free. It was a week after the shooting. Tom had already consoled his son and let him know repeatedly that he supported him. He arranged counseling for his son with a therapist to help him get over the shock of what happened. Therapy helped, but Calvin was still depressed. He wished he had never gotten sick at school that day. In a million years, he never expected his sweet, middle-aged mother capable of having an affair, especially with a young guy determined to sodomize her against her will. His belief in her virtue was forever tainted with the unpleasant memory of her naked form bent over the living room sofa, having sex and begging for mercy. He still needed to have a relationship with her. She was still his mother after all, but he could never look at her the same way again. Gina was let out of the hospital one day after she was admitted. The doctor kept her overnight for observation and gave her a prescription for nerves. He also arranged for marriage counseling because although she was healthy, he realized she was still depressed and their marriage was on life support. She called Tom repeatedly from her hospital bed, but he never answered. Not long after the shooting, Tom figured out just what happened. Gina wasn't being assaulted. She was entertaining her boyfriend in their home when their unsuspecting son caught them in the act. He misunderstood the situation and was simply trying to protect his mother. Tom remained busy with Calvin's legal issues, a perverse blessing because it gave him something to take his mind off his cheating wife. He never visited her in the hospital or returned her calls. He simply deleted her voicemail messages because he couldn't listen without hating her. When she did come home in a taxi, he confronted her at the door. It was while Calvin was still in custody, so their son never heard her sobbing out apologizes or his father angrily shouting at her. She cried and he yelled until they mutually decided it was best for Gina to stay with her parents, at least until he recovered a bit from her infidelity and the way it destroyed their family. They both knew nothing would be the same after this terrible, unexpected incident. Gina's affair hit Tom like a lightning bolt. He had loved her for decades and thought she loved him too. Her sordid affair shocked him to his core. Both he and his son never expected any deceit from her like this. When Tom felt he was ready to discuss their crumbling marriage, he had Gina come over the house. Calvin was at school, trying to catch up on his studies so they could speak in private. The conversation was discouraging and difficult for both, and left Tom thoroughly disgusted with his wife. Tom was a mid-40s assistant manager of a grocery store making decent money, trying to invest for his and Gina's retirement. He's tall and slim and wasn't bad looking for his age. He had a no-nonsense attitude about life, was hardworking, honest, and always put his family first, as he assumed did his wife. He had worked hard to get where he was, and appreciated his wife's efforts to raise their son and keep the house during the difficult early years. Gina worked at the local college in the admissions department. She had a 4-year degree that didn't relate to her career. She's a stocky, short-hair brunette, average-looking but not ugly, big-boned, and in her late 30s looked like an overweight June Cleaver on the Leave It to Beaver show. She was active in the PDA and their church. She just didn't seem to fit the mold of an adulteress, which is why Tom was so shocked. She had been a loving, attentive wife when Calvin was young. As he grew older and grew more involved in after-school activities, she found she wasn't needed as much at home. The revelation caused her to rethink her place in the family, and she became difficult and resentful. Tom thought it was just middle age setting in, because he also felt a midlife crisis at times, like they were working too hard and their marriage was suffering. They needed time alone to reconnect. He repeatedly proposed an extended vacation for the two of them. Gina had rejected his offer multiple times. Now he knew why. Once she began her affair, she grew distant, even remote. More often she came home late and Tom was left to prepare dinner. They missed her when she came home too late to eat with him and their son. But they couldn't wait all night and Calvin had to get up for school. When Tom asked her about her late arrival, she became closed-mouthed or irritable, sometimes confrontational, as if he had no right to question her whereabouts. He learned not to ask about her about working late, or he'd get an angry stare and a sharp, cutting reply. Weeks after the shooting, when they discussed their problems, Gina admitted her late nights were spent with her lover. She said she started resenting her routine life and her husband. Her marriage wasn't exciting anymore, at least in her view. She apologized profusely to Tom for hurting him. She wanted to make amends and to get back the spark in their marriage. He made no commitments and just glared at her bitterly, telling her to keep talking. She told him how she was feeling frustrated in her marriage. As she grew more despondent about her role in the family, she told Tom she met a college guy during one of the school's many social activities. His name was Luke Marino, a former high school football player. He came to college on a scholarship, but had gotten injured and no longer played. But he still worked out regularly at the gym and was in great shape. Why a good-looking young guy like him took up with a dumpy middle-aged woman like her, she couldn't say. Maybe he liked older, chubby women, or had a mother complex. Inside, she felt it was his dominating personality and the fact that he enjoyed the control he exercised over her. Once they started having sex on the nights she was late getting home, Gina became infatuated with him and the hot sex he was providing. He saw her at work one day and started talking to her in her office, just dropping by her desk with a flirty smile and casual conversation. Gina was impressed with his good looks, his cocky attitude, and of course his muscular body. She responded favorably to his advances, and soon he was stopping regularly with an amusing remark or a funny story. Gina heard he was a player. She heard about his reputation, that he'd messed around with a couple of married women that worked in her office. For some reason that made him more interesting. After a few weeks of innocent flirting, the middle-aged wife began looking forward to his visits. Gina found him funny, impolite, handsome, and brash, a true alpha male figure, so unlike her boring husband. Soon they were friends, and Luke asked her out to a bar in town after work. She accepted. They had fun and then did it again. Once the ice was broken, he began taking her to various bars around town. He seemed very cognizant of the party scene around town. It was a new and intriguing world for her. All the bars were college hangouts. Most of the clientele was in their 20s. Gina wasn't the oldest person there, but she sure felt that way. She and Luke would drink and laugh as she hadn't done in years. He used bad language and told her dirty jokes. She couldn't help laughing, he was so entertaining. This was the excitement she craved. As time went on, Gina began to notice other female patrons watching her and her hot young boyfriend having fun. She was amazed that Luke was acquainted with so many people, mostly young guys and girls that all grew quite friendly with his mature brunette girlfriend. Gina loved basking in the attention of young, good-looking guys and watchful, jealous females. At first, they just made out in his car. She knew it was wrong, but the guy could kiss. The first time his mouth hungrily devoured hers, her toes were curling in heat. She couldn't resist the excitement of having a young stud French kissing her like a horny prom date. After a few hot kisses, Gina's mind was swooning. If she didn't stop him quick enough, the young guy would boldly slide in for third base. She knew Luke wanted to screw the first time he took her out, but that didn't deter her one bit. She was elated that a middle-aged, plain-looking woman like her could get him so worked up. At first, she resisted going too far. When he became adamant, Gina tried to console him with a hand job. When that didn't diffuse his demands, she explained how she enjoyed being with him, but they had to set some limits. They needed to keep a veil of respectability in their blooming relationship, or someone might notice. Luke could have cared less. Soon, she gave up resisting and gave in to him more and more. Their once friendly dates became little more than hot makeout sessions in his car, or at some room he arranged for them. Intercourse came not long after that. Once they started having intimate sexual relations, Gina was surprised how anxious she was for more. Luke had really gotten under her skin. She loved his actions and how aggressive he was with her. She was also shocked how submissive she behaved around him. He had so much control over her, he could get her off with very little effort. She loved pleasing him. She'd never been a particularly adventurous lover with her husband. Even when they first married, she couldn't remember enjoying sex like this. With Luke coaxing her into one incredible sexual activity to another, she'd turned into a virtual nymphomaniac. At work, she thought about him constantly. She had to force herself to do her work and not to continually fantasize about his tool. Her mind fixated on what his plans were for the next time they were together. By now, she'd just about cut off her husband from sex. She still gave Tom some dull, vanilla sex a couple times a month, to keep him from getting suspicious. Sex with Tom just didn't do it for her anymore. She felt young and hot with Luke. Her husband was boring and old. Just the thought of relations with him was distasteful. Besides, why should she put up with pleasing her old husband when she had access to more hot sex than she ever dreamed possible? Why should she have doled old hamburger for dinner when prime rib was on the menu anytime she wanted? Each night she went home to her family, she tried to hide her true feelings. She made sure to take care of Calvin as a good mother should. For Tom, that was another story. He was basically on his own now. She made sure to keep the house and have a brief conversation with him from time to time. But after leaving her young lover's bed, Gina wanted more. During the occasional dinner with her family, Gina's thoughts were now solely on her new, young, hot stud, not her family. The beginning of the end came when Luke began to complain about the cost of hotel rooms. He wasn't rich and money was an issue. Soon his friends grew weary clearing out from their place so he could ball his latest girlfriend in a bed. When he was sick of screwing her in the backseat of his car, and it became difficult to get a friend's room, he resorted to paying for a hotel. Unfortunately, his funds were soon depleted, and he wasn't willing to do that for long. His solution was to put the pressure on Gina. She didn't like the awkwardness of screwing in his car either. It was too public, and a few times people had even caught them together. Once he screwed her in the backseat of his car in a parking lot at a bar when a group of people went by and saw them. They began watching through the window, joking about Gina's moaning. It wasn't long after that incident when Gina gave in to him again and brought her hot boy toy back to her house for sex. Tom spent long hours during the day in the grocery store and Calvin was at school all day. So the best time to have sex was during the day before either of them came home. The first time Luke was brought home, it was supposed to happen just that one time. But when they found out how comfortable it was, they began using her house almost exclusively. Gina refused to allow Luke to have her in her bed. Not from any sense of duty or loyalty to her husband, but because it was too hard to keep changing the sheets and dispose of any clues to keep her affair hidden. They began to use the living room sofa regularly, or the floor, or the dining room table. Luke didn't care where. Gina preferred the sofa and found the soft cushions on the sofa to be quite comfortable as the young man pounded her silly. When Calvin came home sick one day and caught her bent over the back of the couch, he was demanding backdoor entry. Gina had to get confrontational to make him stop. That day he was more forceful than ever, and this time wasn't taking no for an answer. They had already been screwing in the living room for a while. Both of them were sweating from their exertions. While she was bent over the back of the sofa, helpless and vulnerable, his male ego inflated at the power he wielded over this cheating wife and mother. He dominated her for months already and wasn't taking no anymore. It was just his bad luck that her teenage son came home sick that day and misunderstood that this was no assault. Unfortunately for him, there was a fatal misunderstanding. 6 weeks after the shooting, Gina received the divorce documents. She and Tom attended a few court-ordered counseling sessions, but their progress to a normal relationship was a failure. She was willing to regain what they had, but he wasn't, and made that crystal clear to the therapist. He still had incredible anger toward her and what had happened to their poor son. Gina had already quit her job at the college. The gossip about her affair and the shooting of her lover was too much to take. None of her coworkers wanted anything to do with her anymore. So she just stayed at home, living like a hermit, a bitter woman filled with remorse and resentment about her ruined life. The process server found her at home. When she opened up the envelope, she threw them on the floor and cried. A month of marriage therapy had done nothing to cool Tom's anger. He hated her now more than ever, and she knew it. Outside of the therapist's office, he didn't speak to her. Her son didn't hate her, but he wasn't speaking to her either. She found the settlement was fair, which was a surprise because Tom was so irate and bitter. But she knew he was a fair man, and he gave what she was due. When Tom came home from work that day, he gave her the ultimatum, and with great sadness, Gina departed the family home and went to live with her parents. She had no place else to go. They were upset with her and suffered for their grandson. But she was their daughter. They let her have her old room, paid for a therapist, and tried to get her back into the world of the living. She spent a lot of time trying to find work, but it seemed her reputation as a cheating wife and the lover of a murdered college student followed her around town like the plague. Father and son stayed together when she left. Tom and Calvin helped each other get over their distress. Both knew it wasn't Calvin's fault that he had tried to save his mother from assault. They now knew all the details, but it was little comfort in their grief. Calvin graduated high school the next year and left town to attend college in another state. He was sick of the attention he received for the shooting and needed to make a clean start. Tom stayed in the home and kept his job at the grocery store. He put all his efforts into his work, trying to forget that dreary, bitter day when his marriage ended in a fatal misunderstanding. No one ended up happy, but life had to go on. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.